Rev share might seem daunting and confusing, but this really could benefit Iowa State sports. We're going to break down how and why today on Locked On Cyclones.
You are Locked On Cyclones, your daily podcast on the Iowa State Cyclones, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome into Locked On Cyclones, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Shout out to you for being here every single day, making this your first watch or listen of the day. I appreciate it more than you know. Wherever you're watching or listening, be sure to subscribe so we can prove once and for all that it is, in fact, a Cyclone state. Today, we're talking really it's NIL, but also mostly the rev share deal going on. How does this benefit Iowa State? What are the challenges Iowa State might face? And finally, we're going to break down how should Iowa State break up these funds. We'll get into all that and more. But first, today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Now, ladies and gentlemen, this is to be quite honest, confusing topic, okay? You're probably in the same boat I am, a little bit unsure of what's going on, but that's what I'm here to do, okay? I'm going to try my best to break down this whole situation, all the articles, the headlines, everything into a really, how does this apply to Iowa State format for you? Okay, so if you enjoy it, let me know down below because this is going to be challenging. Okay, I'm not going to lie. There's a lot going on here. So essentially, there is it looks like it's a bill that could be passed next Wednesday, just over a week from now, in which what it says is the schools are allowed to spend up to 22% of their revenue generated on athletes, like directly from the school. Okay, now what we're kind of familiar with is NIL, and that's a separate deal, right? So they can cooperate, they can act in conjunction, right? So you can have this rev share, and then also on the side, an athlete can go sign with a random sandwich company, okay? But that's not the same thing. This rev share, you're being paid directly from, in this case, Iowa State University, okay? And now I mentioned that 22%. That's an important number, but really what we're going to focus on here is the cap. Okay, so this 22% is what you're allowed to spend. That's the most you can spend out of your revenue generated, but you are capped out at 20.5 million as it sits right now. And now, as I mentioned, this has not gone through yet. Okay, so this is going to be potentially finalized on April 7th, next Wednesday. It could be passed. It could be denied. It could be modified. I don't know exactly what's going to happen, but I'm going to act under the knowledge that I have right now, what I do know at this moment in time before there are any modifications. And so the number right now is $20.5 million. That 22% is important because if the school makes less than a number that would generate $20.5 million off that 22%, they can't go up to the 20.5. Right? They can only spend that 22%. So if they make $100 million, that's 22 million, I think, if my math is correct. But if they make $50 million in revenue, that would be $11 million, and they wouldn't be able to spend any more than that. Now, my math is not always right. My quick math is even worse than my math in general. So please forgive me if that's incorrect. But the point remains that in general, in the Power Four, you're likely looking at a relatively level playing field from the rev share standpoint. And while it is true that Iowa State is kind of on the lower side of things, it looks to me like Iowa State can probably hit that $20.5 million mark, which is really promising. Okay, I do think that that's a big deal. It's a good thing. If you can get those $20.5 million and start to use that for the athletes, if you can hit that mark, right? That's what we're acting under in this assumption. If Iowa State can hit that 20.5 million, now you're on the same level playing field as every other Big 12 team and every other team in the NCAA, right? That's the cap. Like that, you are on that playing field. That's the bottom line, is what I'm saying. Now, the NIL situation, slightly different. Obviously, we've seen in the last few years that some colleges are able to pay their athletes like crazy. I don't really understand that whole situation, but it seems to me like NIL is going to be taking a slight backseat to the rev share situation. And that's what I'm really trying to focus on here is that Iowa State, if they're able to compete and get up to that $20.5 million mark, we're level. That's what's important, right? Iowa State, okay, $20.5 million. Who's probably at the top of the Big 12 right now in basketball? Let's say it's Houston, okay? Because obviously Houston in the Final Four. Houston, $20.5 million. Okay. And football, Iowa State obviously in the Big 12 championship game, but who'd they lose to? Arizona State. Arizona State also at $20.5 million. So if they hit that mark. So relatively important. Now, I will say we have some public record of Iowa State and kind of what they've done in the last few years. I've got here fiscal year 2023 brought in $115 million. And then in 2022 it was $111 million dollars, and then in 2021 they only brought in $72 million dollars. And so those numbers are important because in 2021 they would not have hit the $20.5 million mark. Granted, that's coming off of COVID, and I guess we don't have a 2024 fiscal year yet because that's what this is under. But the 2022-2023 seasons, Iowa State would hit that $20.5 million mark. And this is a big deal. Like I said, if you're on a level playing field, that's we've known for years that there's things going on under the table. And I think it's fair to assume that Iowa State, being a relatively smaller market team, now don't come after me for saying that. I think we can all generally agree that Iowa State doesn't get the same attention as a Bama, as a Georgia, probably even as a Miami. Those SEC schools on a different level. I know Miami in the ACC, but very much a storied football program. And then you go to the basketball schools, right? Duke, Kentucky, UNC, even Kansas in the Big 12, probably on another level as far as what's going on under the table. Unfortunately, I don't have any numbers for you what was going on under the table. If I had them, I'd probably share them. I really, I don't know if I would know where's the line, and I'd just be like, "Hey, I want to tell the Locked On Cyclones fans what's going on." But like I said, I just don't know what was happening, and so I can only assume then that Iowa State wasn't handing out as many McDonald's bags full of money, right? Like that's, I don't think, an unfair assumption. Now, with everyone on the same level playing field, I do think that Iowa State can use that money in a similar way to the other schools, not only in the conference, but in the entire NCAA landscape. And I mention that because obviously Iowa State becoming more and more relevant, something we've talked about on this show, looking to make the 12-team playoff last year and probably again this year. I know Alec Bussey wasn't as high on the Cyclones as I am, but I really do think this Iowa State Cyclones team can be potentially even better than they were last year, especially if Xavier and Chase can step up in the wide receiver position. We're getting so healthy at tight end. We're getting so healthy at linebacker compared to last year. I really do think that this football team can make some very real, serious noise. We already looked at the schedule on this channel. If you want to take a look, go back. Basically, the bottom line, the bye weeks are relatively evenly spaced. I love it. You get to face real competition week 1 in Kansas State. Is that potentially an issue for record? Maybe, but it's not in conference play, so it's not a big deal. On the basketball side of things, TJ Altsberger has elevated the program to a level that is, I mean, to be quite candid, it's remarkable. Okay. And so Iowa State, obviously, this year was potentially looking at being a Final Four team in the middle of the season, I guess, definitely early, maybe middle of the season. But that's national scale, right? If we're looking at Final Four, there's only 4 teams left in the entire NCAA that are like being talked about right now. Okay. And so obviously right now they're all 1 seeds, and Iowa State didn't squeak into that. I think largely due to injuries, but we've talked about that a lot on this channel. So at the end of the day, my point is Iowa State moving into a relevance that is a national scale. And I think it's worth talking about Iowa State in comparison to the entire landscape as opposed to looking at them in the Big 12, right? I don't think it's the same as it was 5-10 years ago where we're competing to get into the top half of the Big 12. And I know that there's going to be outliers in there, but generally feels like Iowa State is on the upswing. So let's take a look at the entire NCAA. Iowa State compared to an Alabama, boom, $20.5 million. I think that's a great thing. I think that does give Iowa State some leverage. I think, you know, if you played NCAA football, there's deal breakers for these players. Okay. Closeness to home, right? And it's not in the game per se, but general kind of just vibes, Okay, now Alabama going to have very different vibes from Iowa State, right? Obviously, temperature, obviously, size of school, obviously, emphasis on what programs. Maybe Alabama, not a great example for basketball because they've been so successful, but look at it, Georgia. If a basketball player is looking at maybe going to Georgia or Iowa State, what would they pick between those two? And so if their rev shares are the same, like, let's just, I feel like that's worth considering. I feel like that's worth mentioning here, and I do think that Iowa State can benefit in that regard. But Iowa State will also face some challenges with this, and we're going to talk about that coming up right after this. Ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app, it's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place so you stop just managing your money and start building wealth. Instead of juggling multiple apps, you can use Monarch to check your finances, track spending, and even plan long term goals. Managing money with your partner is smoother than ever. You can track shared and personal accounts, set goals, and stay on the same page without the stress. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONCollege for half off your first year. Imagine watching your favorite team live, feeling the energy of the crowd and witnessing unforgettable moments. There's nothing like experiencing a big game in person. Getting tickets should not be stressful. That's where Game Time comes in, making it easier than ever to grab last-minute seats at unbeatable prices. Curation makes Game Time Picks curation, makes it easier to find better value for tickets to sports, concerts, comedy, theater, etc. I just checked the Game Time app, and there are amazing deals on some huge matchups coming up. Obviously, big, big, big matchups. The lowest price guarantee or Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. With seat views before you buy, that is my favorite feature. No surprise fees and a lowest price guarantee you can book with total confidence. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. That's LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. So Iowa State in this whole NIL rev share situation may seem like they're at a bit of a level playing field, like we talked about in the first segment here at Locked On Cyclones, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. But I do think Iowa State will face some challenges, and there are three big ones I'd like to get to in this segment. So stick around. The first being that 22% is relatively important. We talked mostly about the $20.5 million cap in the first segment. While I do think that is a very important number, the 22% is also extremely important. I threw around some numbers of the revenue that Iowa State has generated in the last few years. And so, you talk about 115 million, 72 million in 2021, big deal, but 111 million in between there. I do think that those numbers make it difficult for Iowa State. I think I can't find the numbers right in front of me, but the numbers are essentially around that $22 to $24 million mark for the last, it's fiscal year 2022 and fiscal year 2023. That's really cutting it close on that $20.5 million mark for some colleges in not only the Big 12, but I mean, look at across the entire nation. They're generating significant amounts more in value. I mean, just look at Kansas bringing in $206 million. That's a lot of money. That is a lot of money. And in the Big 12, Iowa State is kind of on the bottom half, unfortunately, with the revenue that is being brought in. And there are certainly topics of conversation that Iowa State fans feel like may bring in more revenue that some in the administrative world of Iowa State have not passed, I suppose, have not given clearance to. Nonetheless, the numbers are the numbers. And that 22% is important because, to my knowledge, at this point, all of the money generated, all of the revenue generated is put right back into the facilities put back into the facilities is the big one. But there are other things that Iowa State obviously spends that money on. I'm sure that the dietitian, obviously the staff and all that, I'm sure that some of that's used. I don't unfortunately have access to the books, but the point is that money is being used. A lot of it is being used. It's not just going straight into the pockets of the coaching staff or of Jamie Pollard or of Wendy Winterstein's, right? So Winterstein, these numbers are being used. And so you're essentially kind of pulling out 22% of that or slightly less if you make more. So maybe 20, let's say 21.1% of the 22. That's where they hit that 20.5 million. Now you're working with what would that be? 80 point, what did I say? 81.1. So, or 21.1. I don't even know. I don't want to do the math right now. I apologize for that. But roughly 80% of what they would usually be using. And so there is an element to Iowa State having to stretch the budget to use that entire $20.5 million cap towards their sports. Now, will they stretch it, or will they just go with what seems like financially responsible for the university? I don't have the answer to that yet. Obviously, I would rather them just stretch it to the 20.5 million. You bring in better athletes, then you have more revenue generated with more success. And then it's easy the next year, the next 2 years, the next 3 years, as you start to bring in better and better prospects and see more and more success, that number of revenue generated goes up and that percentage essentially goes down. If Iowa State generated $400 billion to hit the $20.5 million cap, it'd be like chips in an enormous basket of fish and chips. Like, it's like, oh, you want a few chips? Boom, here's a few. Like the fries, it obviously for America, like this massive basket of burger and fries, and you're like, oh, this burger is going to be delicious, and you got this big old pile of fries on the side, and your friend's like, got a little salad over there because he's on a diet, and he's like, hey, can I have a fry or two? And that would be like the $20.5 million. Yeah, here you go, no big deal. But right now, they're essentially asking for like a quarter of your burger, and in the basket you didn't really get any fries on the side. So you're kind of like, I don't really want to give you a quarter of my burger here. I paid for this whole thing. This is a whole deal here. I can understand where that would generate some tension. Does Iowa State want to get up to that percentage or not? I don't have the answer right now, but that could very well be a problem. Another being, really, it comes down to kind of the Big East. It's more than just the Big East, but it is kind of a lot of things at once. What does the Big East have? That's the question. The Big East has really no football. That's kind of what it is. The Big East doesn't have to worry about spending a percentage of their rev share on a major football program. They can dive into basketball. They can put all of their money into one program as opposed to having to worry about, obviously football being a large revenue generator for really the Power Four conferences, but especially in like at Iowa State, in the Big 12, in the SEC, maybe not so much in the ACC, I suppose, but nonetheless, the point is schools like St. John's, Villanova, UConn, obviously St. John's in recent years more successful, but Villanova, UConn, Creighton, Seton Hall, these kinds of schools that can focus solely on their basketball program, they'll hit that number significantly easier, even with less revenue generated, and opposed to a school like Iowa State, where you're struggling to hit the 20.5% or 20.5 million out of the 22% already, right? That 20.5 million is divided. That 20.5 million is not just like, okay, here's 20.5 million for football, here's 20.5 million for men's basketball, here's 20.5 million for women's basketball. No, you get $20.5 million. How are you going to divide that up? Are you going to give 80% to football, then 10% and 10%, 10% men's basketball, 10% everything else? Is that how you're going to do it? Well, I can tell you probably, well, I can't tell you a definitive answer, but I bet UConn will probably spend like 80% of that on basketball. And that is a huge, huge difference. Now, is Iowa State directly competing with the Big East? No, they're not. And so I don't know how much of this, of a difference this will make, but it is certainly something to consider. And finally, I don't know what's going to be happening under the table now with a cap on this. When you do put a cap on things, it allows for things to go under the table. The cap before being at zero obviously made things a little bit different, but now with a cap, even if it is at 20.5 million, there's a cap. And so that is something that Iowa State will have to deal with and potentially do themselves. But where should Iowa State spend their funding? We're going to talk about that coming up right after this. Get the supplies you need from the site made for the skilled trades, Supply House. Whether you're in plumbing, HVAC, or electrical work, Supply House is the reliable way to order products online. Their easy-to-use website is packed with helpful resources and the latest product info to help you get the job done right. Plus, with a complete inventory of over 200,000 parts from 400 plus top brands, you'll find exactly what you need delivered fast from coast to coast. Need help with an order? Supply House offers expert support and industry-leading service, so you'll always talk to a real person. And for trade pros looking for an extra edge, their free Trademaster program offers exclusive perks like a dedicated phone line, free shipping, and discounts on every order. Thousands of skilled professionals are already taking advantage. Now it's your turn. Join the Trademaster program today at supplyhouse.com/TM and start ordering plumbing, HVAC, and electrical supplies with just a few clicks. Plus, use promo code SH5 for 5% off your first order. That's supplyhouse.com.
The NCAA tournament is here, and so is the bracket breakdown.
Locked On Podcast Network and Amazon Fire TV channels are teaming up to deliver NCAA tournament coverage like never before. Watch studio shows featuring former players and Locked On's local experts as they guide you through every upset, buzzer beater, and bracket matchup.
Stream it all for free on Amazon Fire TV channel. Search Bracket Breakdown to see it all for free.
It's your team every day.
All right, so Iowa State having to work within this rev share model could be very interesting. I'm not going to lie. Here at Locked On Cyclones, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, I've got a few opinions. We're talking about how should Iowa State split up that money. It's something I didn't really talk about in the first segment and kind of threw in at the end of the second segment there, but I've talked a lot about this $20.5 million. It's a cap that all schools have if this rev share model gets passed, but I didn't talk about so much in depth that 20.5 million needs to be used across all sports. Okay. And a model that's kind of being thrown around right now. I saw in an article from Ross Dellinger, about 70 to 85% of the money going to football, 10 to 20% going to men's basketball, and then the rest, essentially 10 to 15%, however you split it up, goes to the rest of the sports. This is tough because obviously we talked about the Big East schools and how they don't really have any other real programs, so you can kind of allocate the money differently. For a Villanova or a UConn or a Creighton, you can put a ton of money into basketball. That's where their revenue is generated. It makes sense for them. But for a team like Georgia, you think they're going to be putting anything over 10% into their basketball program? Unlikely. It's very unlikely. And for Iowa State, they find themselves in a tricky situation with both the football and men's basketball teams seeing really, obviously, a lot of growth, but also really solid success under TJ Otzelberger and Matt Campbell. So the question for me is, how does Iowa State split this up? And now, while dollars don't necessarily mean success, they don't hurt it either. And so under that $20.5 million, this is going to be maybe a little bit of a hot take. So hold on to your seat, grab your popcorn. I'm not going to lie to you. I kind of want Iowa State to spend some money on basketball. I don't think Iowa State can go with an 85% football model just because we haven't seen a lot of growth or a lot of, I don't know how to put this, but like the potential for basketball feels higher right now. Could Iowa State benefit on the football side of things from bringing in a ton of money? Of course they could and will. But you're also going to be competing with some of the best schools ever. And when Iowa State basketball feels so close under TJ Otzelberger, I do think that allocating a few more funds to the basketball side of things would be beneficial. Now, am I saying you give 85% to the basketball team? No, I am not saying that. I just don't think that Iowa State can lean as heavily into the football as maybe like a Georgia in the SEC. Alabama is pretty 50-50, but maybe like even like a Texas or an Oklahoma, Texas was pretty solid in basketball, but Oklahoma really wasn't any noisemaker. And I imagine a lot of their money, if they were to split this up, if it were to get passed, would go mostly into the football side of things. Because, yes, football is one of the main generators of revenue. I'm not denying that. But I do think that also if Iowa State were to start just, I mean, look at how successful they were this year and how much the Clone fans were behind them. You were behind them. I was behind them, right? And so obviously the same thing applies to football. And I can hear already the comments just combating this thought process. But I don't think to go super one-sided into football would benefit where Iowa State sits right now. I think you probably go maybe even I don't know. I want to throw any numbers around here, but I'm going to. What if we did like a 60-30-10? What if we did something like that? Is that too outrageous? Is that just out the back door? I mean, let that sink in. Are you kidding me? I think that I now literally just threw numbers around. Okay, so let's not get too bent out of shape here. But I do think that's like kind of the range that I want Iowa State to operate in. Maybe it's 65-25-10. Assuming that Iowa State leaves 10% for all the other sports. If they bump that up to 15, those numbers shift a little bit again. But I do think that Iowa State needs to prioritize basketball. I really do. Hilton Magic, very, very real. Okay, we can't let Hilton Magic go anywhere. And it's widely recognized as one of the best college basketball kind of home environments. Okay. And that's for a reason. And if you just let everyone else put all this money into basketball, like imagine Kansas. Is Kansas going to put a lot of money into basketball, or are they going to put all their money into football? Probably not putting a more than majority chunk into football. Should they? I don't know. I don't have the answers. But I just imagine based on past performance and what Kansas is known for, that the split is going to be closer to basketball dominant than that of Georgia, right? And I keep going back to them because Georgia basketball has not been great and their football program kind of has. So that's a perfect example. But obviously, tons of schools are kind of in the same situation here. And I'm not going to kind of go into it. But the point is, if a school is very strong in basketball, and that's where a lot of like they're kind of known, their brand is there, like all of that, I can very well see those schools putting a lot of money into that program. And I think Iowa State could benefit from putting a fair amount of money into a basketball program to bring in some huge recruits. Okay, now, obviously, rev share not in the game right now, but Clough did just commit to Purdue. And I'm not going to talk about it a ton. Maybe we'll talk about it a little bit later this week and what Iowa State men's basketball needs to do. But if Iowa State puts a bunch of money, or let's say Iowa State puts more money into basketball from the rev share cut than Purdue does, and they're able to offer Clough more than Purdue, where does Clough go at that point? Now, this is just literally off the top of my head, maybe not in the best taste, but my point is that I think if Iowa State puts more money into basketball, it can compete in that environment a little bit more. And I do feel like Iowa State basketball is closer to a national championship than football. Let me know down below if you disagree. But I just think that there was real talk of Iowa State being a Final Four team this year. Was there real talk of Iowa State football being, in the championship game or in the quarterfinals? I don't think so. There was obviously hope they would make the playoff, but I don't think that there was talk that they would bust open the playoff, and they were just too hurt this year, right? And I there's just such a gap between some of the top end talent right now, and I think obviously Arizona State represented the Big 12 well, but only getting one team in from the Big 12 and losing their first game doesn't look great either. So I think obviously the Big 12 basketball side of things, like I think Iowa State needs to explore that. Let me know if you disagree down below, but I really do think that if Iowa State were to split the pie a little bit more in favor of basketball, that would benefit them long run. Now, like I said, obviously I know football, major revenue producer, not so much basketball. And then obviously everything else kind of in that last little sliver. I get that. I really do. But I do think that if Iowa State were to bring more money into the basketball side of things and bring home a national championship, that's a big deal. That's a big deal. You can't tell me that wouldn't be enormous for the university, for the program. I think that would be I don't know. That's just what I would do. But there's a reason that I'm not in that seat. I'm in this one. So, nonetheless, if you made it to this point, be sure to hit subscribe. We can prove once and for all it's a Cyclone State. And let me know what you think of this whole deal, because this is a very, very interesting one. I think it's confusing, but it's also promising, but also there's problems. So I'm interested to hear what your thoughts are in the comment section down below. Until next time, Cyclone fans, sign up.